Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Professor Dan Woodman. I'm a sociologist from the University of Melbourne. I'm also the president of the Council for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. And with that hat on today, I'm talking to Dr. Robyn Gulliver, who was our prize winner last year for our Distinctive Works Prize. Robyn completed this work when the work is tied to her time as a PhD student in the School of Communications and Arts at the University of Queensland. So Robyn last year won our Student Award Prize as well, which is unheard of in the not 100-year, but almost 20-year history of CHASS. You know, we haven't been going for that long, but we've never had this happen before. Our Distinctive Work Prize is open to people at all career points. So to have an early career researcher win it is really exciting. And what the panel loved about this work was that the way it kind of brought aspects of citizen science and database creation to social science and climate change. So, you know, there's constantly, I guess, news that is depressing. I was reading this morning in the paper an article saying 20% of younger Australians are thinking or planning to not have children because of the worry they have about climate change. We had the recent IPCC report that like the ones before it, sounded the alarm bells again for the challenges the world faces. My own research, I'm a sociologist, and I track young people as they're growing up in Australia from the end of high school as they go through their late teens and 20s. And we do ask them about what their biggest concerns and worries are, and climate change comes right at the top. So this can all seem very depressing, but there's also lots of people out there doing things to try and make a difference in this space. And one of the great things about this piece of work is it's pulling together all those efforts that people are putting in. So yeah, Dr. Robyn Gulliver was our Distinguished Work Prize winner, our student prize winner for this project last year. And she's currently doing a postdoc at the University of Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, but is currently in Queensland. So I'm down in Melbourne, so I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, stuck at my home for the I think the 213th day or something like that of our various lockdowns, but Robyn's up in Queensland. And from next year, she'll be rejoining the School of Communications and Arts at UQ on a postdoc. So has gone to Hong Kong and back again without leaving Queensland in this world we live in at the moment, but also maybe a sustainable way to do our academic work, I guess, Robyn. So thank you so much for joining us. Robyn's going to speak for about 20 minutes and then we'll have some questions and discussion. So over to you, Robyn. I'll just stop sharing my screen and let you bring yours up.
Thank you, Dan. I'll just bring up the presentation now. Okay, everybody can see that? Yep, great. Thank you for that introduction, Dan. It's a great honour to be able to talk to you today about the Campaign Explorer on this first day of Social Sciences Week. I was really proud to receive the CHASS Prize for this work, and receiving the recognition that the project was valuable was a really galvanising and motivating experience. So thank you very much to the Council for both your advocacy for CHASS and for supporting this work through the annual prize. First, I'd like to start by acknowledging that currently I am on the lands of the Quandamooka people, traditional owners of what we call the Redlands Coast for over 21,000 years, now called Brisbane. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging on these lands, and acknowledge that these lands are unceded and always have been, always will be Aboriginal land. So today in this presentation, I'm going to cover 4 topics. First, I'll look at what the Campaign Explorer is and its connection to the humanities and social sciences. Following that, I'll briefly explain how the project developed. Thirdly, I'll show you some of the outputs. And lastly, I'll consider the citizen science component and future dreams. So first up, what is the Campaign Explorer and how is this connected to CHASS? So the Campaign Explorer is a large database of Australian environmental groups, campaigns, campaign outcomes, and activist stories. Using extensive empirical data, which I'll describe later in the presentation, it builds a model of environmental activism. The later stage of the project also gives volunteers an opportunity to continuously add data to this model. The Explorer has three aims. Firstly, to advance our knowledge of environmental activism processes and outcomes. Second, to act as an archive of activism history, knowledge, and achievements. And thirdly, to help activists, policymakers, and researchers work together to create rapid solutions to our environmental crisis. Now, humanities and social science researchers have long been interested in the dynamics and outcomes of social and environmental movements. Their work crosses just about every possible CHASS discipline. For example, this graph shows the findings of a systematic review I have, which is currently under review, on the outcomes of environmental campaigns. In this review, we considered 114 papers, and together they covered 28 different subject areas, including sociology, political science, international relations, business, and social work. In addition to this extensive research work, there's a whole world of on-the-ground activism happening every single day. In fact, you, like me, might have thought that environmental activism, particularly related to climate change, has been escalating over the past 10 or 20 years. And at the same time, as Dan mentioned earlier, our dire predictions of environmental calamity are actually becoming reality. Now, I've been involved in environmental activism for many years, but despite all of this research and all of the lived experience of so many past activists, I couldn't find the answer to a central question: what makes environmental activism more likely to succeed? Or, to put it in a more scholarly way, what factors are significantly associated with environmental activism success? There is, of course, this vast body of literature on the outcomes of social movements, but it can be really difficult for activists to learn from this research for a wide range of reasons, some of which are listed here. So the Campaign Explorer is designed to help overcome these barriers by building this extensive open source data set, which is available to both researchers and activists to use for their work. So now we're going to turn to the actual structure of the Campaign Explorer itself. Now, environmental movements are very complicated entities which are constantly changing and responding to the particular context in which they emerge. But at the fundamental level, all movements have some shared characteristics, and it is these characteristics which form the basis of the Campaign Explorer. So first off, we have a movement. The boundaries of a movement are often hard to define, but we can work off a definition that a movement is composed of individuals with a shared identity and concern, who interact in a network and who engage voluntarily in collective action. The movement is composed of groups, big ones, small ones, informal, formal, staffed, or volunteer. You might recognize the names of some of these environmental groups here, or you might not. These groups may engage in campaigns. Campaigns are an organized course of action to achieve a goal. Each campaign has an issue, a target, and a goal. Some have lots of groups and people involved, and some don't. And finally, these groups and campaigns use tactics or events or collective actions. They have a number of different names. These actions can be people engaging in pro-environmental behaviours, such as at home, such as recycling or planting trees. At the other end, they can involve civil resistance behaviours like blockades and sit-ins. So as you can see, this data captures the very granular day-to-day activities of the environmental movement, as well as the ebbs and flows of activity over the longer term. By adding in data about the extent to which campaigns actually achieve their stated goals, we can also build on that past research to start answering that question: what factors are significantly associated with environmental activism success? Now, the project was developed in 3 stages. Stage 1 was the data I collected during my PhD. And I think that you really have to do this during a PhD because you would probably never want to commit to doing it outside of a PhD. So the first year was fully involved with collecting the data. And I was extremely lucky to do my PhD under Professors Kelly Fielding and Winifred Lewis at UQ. I don't think it's possible to get a better supervisory team, to be honest. I don't think they quite believed me when I said I wanted to get this data, but they let me run with it, and here we are today. So the first stage of the project in the first year of my PhD involved creating a study population of 497 groups, automatically scraping their websites using R, and undertaking a content analysis which identified this information. Of those groups, almost half of them were focused on local issues, half of them were focused on conservation as their primary issue, 83 groups did climate change. In that 1 year, for just those groups, they listed 961 individual campaigns on their websites, and together they claimed almost 5 million supporters and members. Stage 2 then involved an expansion of the data set and setting up a website. The expansion occurred when another group asked me to compile a database of all the environmental groups in Australia that people could volunteer for. It meant that I also included the groups that don't fit the Australian charities and not-for-profit definition of advocacy, which was used to guide stage 1 of the project. So lots of bushcare groups, catchment groups, wildlife groups, etc. were added. I also started adding more campaigns from another project I had, and through a digital fellowship at UQ under the Research Computing Centre, I discovered that I was able to get an Amica S site for this data hosted at UQ. Stage 3, which is now, involved another big change. This primarily was moving the entire site from the Amica S site at UQ onto WordPress. It's underway and it's almost completed. And now we are up to testing the citizen science component and incorporation of the data into the database. There's still a lot of work and testing that needs to be done on this component. For example, the tasks need to be clear, easy to follow, simple to understand, and the user experience of the site needs to be top-notch. I'll talk about this more in the last section. As you can see on the slide there, at the moment with the database, we have just under 3,000 groups, 1,200 campaigns, 300 campaign outcomes, and around 35,000 events. Now, first in our next section, I just want to highlight some of the outputs from the project so far. The most substantial output so far is a monograph funded by the International Centre on Nonviolent Conflict in Washington, DC. The data from the Explorer was used to situate climate change civil resistance within the wider Australian environmental movement, and then consider civil resistance activities and outcomes. The monograph should be ready any day now, which is very exciting. There's also been a range of academic papers, 3 of which have been published today. The first looked at the evolution of environmental movement in Australia using the data collected from the content analysis of the websites. Another paper has used linguistic analysis techniques to ascertain the mobilisation potential of the website text and match it with selected group characteristics, such as how much funding each group has. We've also used quite a bit of data to consider climate change activism in particular. On the left is a graph identifying the outcomes of 61 climate change campaigns. You can see from the pie chart that 25 of those campaigns, 41%, achieved full or partial success. What we did is we looked at the stated goals of the campaigns and 2 years later did a search to see if those campaign outcomes have been achieved. There is no claim of causation between what the groups did in the campaign and what the outcome was, but we hope by building this data up, hundreds and thousands of campaigns, we can see correlations and associations. On the right-hand side, I used R topic modelling to identify the prevalent climate change topics across the groups, those 497 groups. Found 4 main topics were associated with climate change in Australia. Climate change in mining, particularly coal mining, climate change in health, climate change in finance, and climate change in the Great Barrier Reef. There's also been a range of non-academic outputs. An ArcGIS story map on climate change groups and campaign outcomes has been viewed over 2,500 times, and I created a number of reports and outputs such as Twitter stories on campaigns. There are so many other projects that the data can be used for. There just needs to be a few more hours in the day to do them. So where to from here? This leads me to the final section of the presentation, the citizen science component and future opportunities. Now, just for background, citizen science projects have often been primarily situated in the natural sciences. However, there are an increasing number of examples from other disciplines. For example, one really popular application of citizen science to social sciences at the moment is transcriptions. The Smithsonian Institute has a project transcribing old records related to women's role in science, for example. DigiVol has lots of similar projects examining materials from earlier researchers and public figures. and Every Name Counts asks volunteers to transcribe records for the archive of victims and survivors of National Socialism. Another new example, which has just received funding at UQ, is monitoring digital marketing. I'm not sure what the project will look like, but it's exciting that more applications of citizen science in the social sciences are happening on the horizon. Now, the citizen science component is really important for the Campaign Explorer because given the scale of environmental activism happening constantly, volunteers' contribution could make a really meaningful difference to the success of the project. As mentioned, we're still designing and testing the citizen science interface on the Explorer. It's challenging to make the data and tasks simple and clear. At the moment, volunteers can search for information on 3 aspects: campaigns and their outcomes, the groups, and the individual activist stories. These are a little bit, at the moment, they're a little bit complicated, but they're geared up to people who are already activists and know the structure of the movement. They find whatever information they can and they send it through the website via a contact plugin form. I then check and upload that data into the database. They can also send any other information. For example, a volunteer sent me information about new groups that are not currently on the database. They can do that through the plugin form at any time too, but it is time consuming. So the main task at the moment is to have the database continually grow in the most efficient way possible while ensuring the integrity of the data. To assist with this, I'm looking at future data collection at the moment. As mentioned above, we'll be testing and refining the citizen science interface, and there are also opportunities to directly catalog campaigns. So for example, every year, many hundreds of new campaigns are created by different groups, and these should be included to improve our data outputs. Also, I have an automated web scraping and text detection code running on R. This extracts mentions of selected words, such as campaign, from websites at regular intervals. However, the remaining process of screening all of those extracted words and uploading relevant ones to the database is still time consuming. As the images in the background of the slide suggest, the ultimate goal of the Campaign Explorer is to facilitate the development of environmental activism models. Just as models track bird flight across Africa on the left here, or the traffic in various cities on the right, or our changing climate, it may be possible to create a model tracking likely trajectories and outcomes of activism given specific inputs and contexts. It's exciting to think this might be happening, and the CHASS Award is really incredibly affirming on that. It's not always been easy finding the right home for this project. It doesn't fit nicely into a single discipline or methodological approach, and this has made consideration of funding opportunities challenging and frankly sometimes quite demoralising. So receiving the support from CHASS has been a fantastic experience, and I recommend that everybody submits an application for this year's prize. So thank you very much to the Council, to all those who have helped me on this project, and to all of you listening today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. That was wonderful. Can I have a couple of questions before we shift and see if there's questions from the audience as well. And thank you, I should say, for the shout out for the prizes as well at the end. When you were talking about how you did this project in a PhD and it would have been very hard to do it outside a PhD, I was thinking back to how I introduced you, saying you also won our student prize, and it was amazing for an early career researcher to win our distinctive works award. But of course, it's a little bit unfair to just call you an early career researcher in the context of climate change, because when I was doing my research to introduce you, if the internet hasn't misled me, and you talked about the issue of quality data as well, so I hope I don't get this wrong, but it looks like you have done other things before you came to this around being involved in conservation projects. I think I read that you were also a pumpkin weeder at one point, a cleaner, a bean packing house manager, and a teacher. So many other amazing, interesting things. So I was wondering, what was it in your work that got you thinking, I need to go do a PhD, or I need to do this project? How did you end up doing a PhD on this work?
That's a good question, Dan. And I suppose like a lot of people, maybe my age, I'm 45, it's kind of a long trajectory, isn't it? To wake up to the state that our environmental situation is currently in. I think I had been working in the Pilbara in WA, and then I came over to Queensland for a job managing a conservation organisation here. And I had been involved in activism for probably 10 or 15 years since I left New Zealand. And I first became interested in activism actually when I was working on an apple orchard, and I was doing the thinning. I don't know if any of you have worked on in horticulture, but with fruit trees, you have to pull off all the little fruit so that the remaining ones get big, right? And I was thinning these fruit trees and they were spraying, did this all the time. And I asked them what they were spraying sun cream on the fruit. This was in New Zealand. And I remember that moment really distinctively because I just thought, what? Apples have survived for so long without the need for us to put sun cream on, right? So that triggered it for me, and then I became involved as a volunteer. When I came to Brisbane, I was managing this organisation, and there really are activists who have incredible amounts of experience. Some activists I know and actually have interviewed for a different PhD project have been doing environmental activism in some way for 40 or 50 years, if not more. So they have amazing lived experience. But there's a little bit of a mismatch between the research and that lived experience. And when I was managing this organisation, it really became quite apparent. So we need to design campaigns that are really effective, and we need to design them right now. And anybody living in Australia for a long time is aware of how some campaigns just spectacularly fail and become useful for perhaps opposition politicians to use as a weapon against environmental activists to portray those negative stereotypes of activists and dismiss what they say. So it's really important for having great design campaigns which bring the community on board and kind of persuade us to take action as well. But I just couldn't see any evidence at that time of what those campaigns might be beyond that lived experience. So yes, I used to be a maths teacher. I used to teach calculus actually, and I love data. And I think, if we just had heaps of data, wouldn't that be so useful? And wouldn't it be quite possible really to start tracking this? Once I thought that, then you have that thought and you can't really walk away, right? So it started after that. Also, just as an aside, when I worked for the Water Corporation in the Pilbara, I was managing water efficiency projects, and we used information that had been given by a researcher here at UQ, Kelly Fielding. And when I got to Brisbane and I realised she was here, I just emailed her and said, you're amazing. Can I do a PhD with you? And she basically said yes.
And as you said, those supervisors can make a big difference.
Oh yes.
I'm really interested in, I as a social scientist, I agree. Just if we had the data, we could do so much, and you started to pull it together. I'm wondering how people who are involved in movements have reacted to this. And I'm also, about its value, or how they might use it to know what works or what doesn't work. But I guess I'm also interested if you've had anyone interested in what works or doesn't work for purposes you might not agree with. Like, is there any chance that, say, law enforcement or others who have different aims might also be able to make use of a database that shows exactly what's going on and what's working, what's not?
Yes, and that does occur to me quite frequently as well, and I have wondered about it. The main aspect of the database which will alleviate this issue is that it's all publicly available information. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in my experience as an environmental activist, there are some people who will use some environmental activism information against them, but they are very, very few in number. So I think people who generally really try to counteract environmental activism have their own agendas, and they're going to perhaps not be persuaded by any data anyway, whether it's for or backs up their argument or not. So it's important to me that A, the data is all publicly available, and B, nothing is there that could be used in that way without a whole lot of effort by someone else. So at the moment, the database is downloadable, but I screen who downloads it. And I used an example of quite a famous database in the US, actually. This database was created by Professor Erica Chenoweth in her PhD. She looked at 120 years of media reports on politically social movements that sought to achieve regime change in different contexts, different countries. She looked at violent and non-violent activism, and she compared the two. She found that if you use non-violent activism, you're more likely to succeed in regime change, and you need 3.5% of your population to engage in that activism. She created this data set. It's called the NAVCO data set. You can also download that. So that kind of was an inspiration for this project as well. All publicly available data, but she actually screens who downloads it first. You need to register. So I think with those components, I'm really comfortable with the data, and I'm comfortable with it being available and searchable. I think you mentioned whether other groups or people have been using this. There certainly have been people interested, particularly in the campaign outcomes. So that's a critical part of the database, not just what the groups are. You can look those up any day online, right? Or what they're doing, just go to Facebook. They want to know what ones win. And so the most interesting piece of data for them has been that targeting businesses is more successful than targeting politicians or governments, and that the climate change campaigns actually do have quite a high successful outcome.
Great, thank you, Robyn. Yeah, Erica Chenoweth's data set is amazing. I do know about that. I teach my students about it. And I guess it's wonderful to hear that non-violent means are more successful, really. And 3.5 sounds doable sometimes, although I do recall hearing her speak about how that's active involvement. That's not everyone who's kind of on site. It's people out on the streets, which, you know, when you're getting close to needing 1 million people out on the streets, it's like, change can happen, but there's still a little bit to do to get to that kind of really big revolutionary change. But that's a really good example. But speaking about getting people involved, I was so interested in this model of shifting towards citizen science with the database. Do you have a sense of why it might be that citizen science has been around for a while now and quite popular, but it seems that the social sciences that are about things that are deeply important to many, many people maybe haven't done as much citizen science as the natural sciences. Is there ironically something about it being about the things that matter most deeply to us and are embedded in politics and other things that sometimes makes it harder? Or what do you think?
I think there might be an element of that particularly with this, anything to do with movements, there is a political aspect that you mentioned. The data can be used against you, right? But I think the bigger thing that I've experienced is just the sheer technological barriers to setting up a citizen science project. It's really, really hard. This is actually where the CHASS Prize was great, because I've used it to fund some help to set up the WordPress site. Now I've created lots of different websites. It's not hard, but converting that into this volume of data and then enabling people to interact in it was exceptionally difficult. You really do have to have a software engineer to be able to do it. So you've got this high barrier. And also, when I think about it as well, if there wasn't much data in there, it'd be quite hard to convince people to participate. You kind of need a really good solid base of data or background to start a citizen science project. And the natural sciences just have that already. They just have it. The last point I think I might make is that this type of stuff, and I think a lot of social science and citizen science projects probably involve an element of research. The type of things I'm getting volunteers to do on this means they're essentially researching the groups, they're researching the campaigns and putting that information on. When you think about natural science and citizen science project, like right now I'm sitting and looking at my window, I could just have an app and look at a butterfly, put it in the app. And that's it, it takes 5 seconds. That's not the case with the citizen science and the social sciences, even the transcription ones. So I think there's a variety of challenges that make it, I don't want to say easier or harder, but I think there's a lot of barriers that make it more difficult to set up social science, citizen science projects.
That's a really good point. A lot of those citizen science projects involve, you see a bird, take a picture of the bird, kind of, you're done. I do know that some of our students here in Victoria, where I am, who do sociology in year 11 and 12 have a unit on movements where they've got to do some research on a particular movement. We'll have to work on getting them adding the database to their assessment tasks or something for all our students in Victoria, because you're right, it is just that extra little bit of work. Robyn, thank you so much. I might get you to stop sharing your screen now, and I'll just open it up. And if there is any of our other people in the audience live today who want to jump in and ask a question, now is your chance. Jen, jump in.
Thank you, Robyn. That was a really fascinating presentation. I'm a lecturer in human geography, so it's certainly within my field of interest. You've touched on this a little bit, but I want to push you just a little bit further. We're thinking about, and I don't know whether you just couldn't cover this today in a short presentation, and this is something that you have been doing, but I guess, you know, when you report on the numbers of groups and their campaigns, is there an assumption that these campaigns are somehow good or legitimate? Or, I mean, environmental issues are very contested, and some less so than others, some more so than others, and for different reasons. But for many of these environmental issues, there's no silver bullet or one way to address it, and some of the contestation is around how to go about addressing it. So if one group is more powerful than the other, what does that mean, I guess?
Good question, and I think I can respond a little bit to it. Part of the database that has been hard to transfer over to the citizen science component is the networks. So which groups are associated with which, and which campaigns are structured in different ways. So for example, Extinction Rebellion, Stop Adani, School Strike for Climate, they're kind of directed network campaigns. We have a central core and all these other groups come off the side. Then you might have groups which have a lot more funding and historical kind of stability, like Australian Conservation Foundation, that might run its own individual campaigns, have a very different approach. What I guess I try to do is I don't make any opinions, or as researchers, we don't make any opinions or judgments on the campaign or the validity of the campaign or anything. We just use the exact words they put on their websites. And this has been really hard sometimes to explain to reviewers as well, because we've got all these campaigns, 961 campaigns. I think about 100 of them didn't even say what the goal was. So they didn't say what they wanted their campaign to achieve. Another couple of hundred said it's just a climate change campaign. We want to solve climate change. So, you know, as an individual, just making a statement about that, I don't know if that's the most helpful language to use around your campaign, either to get people to engage in it or to achieve your outcome, but that's what it was. So I'm not sure if that goes partly to answering your question, but we just try to stick very closely to what the groups themselves are saying. As a slight aside, one other thing that really fascinated me was when I looked at those 497 groups, I thought there might be a good 20 or 30 groups that were on the other side. I don't know if you've ever seen this Stop Adani, the anti-Stop Adani group. For a while, it had a green sign. It was like, Go Adani. Well, in the 497 groups, there was only one group that was actively doing kind of the other side, saying get rid of environmental activism. So I think that speaks to the actual ubiquitousness of environmental care and activism in Australia. Do you want to follow up and sort of explain more? Did you have more questions about that? I don't know if I fully answered it.
No, I don't. I mean, I think, yes, you have, in that, you know, I think you have to sit within the bounds of your research and what your questions are, and not making judgments is perhaps, you know, really appropriate for that research that you were doing in that citizen science. But I guess that leads back into what Dan was sort of asking, whether, you know, other researchers could take or build on what you've done and then maybe take that further. But again, you know, that would be putting judgments on what is legitimate or various forms of legitimacy or power and that sort of thing. But it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. I do remember with the monograph, we that was done with the American Centre, and one of the comments they gave back was that we don't talk about justice enough. So in all of the monograph and all of the data, we weren't mentioning really climate justice or environmental justice. And it was difficult because it's very topical right now, and it should be, my personal judgment again, it should be a really central part of how we move forward with sustaining and building our environment and protecting it. But we were able in that case to go back to the data. I did the topic modeling again. I looked through all of those websites. It's like 70,000 pages of text. And basically they use the word, environmental groups use the word justice 0.01% of the time in Australia. So it's just not a common theme at that time, 2017. And I felt that that was quite good because there was a legitimate concern about the lack of consideration of justice in the Australian environmental movement. But we were able to point back and say, well, that's where the movement was then. If I can rerun that archive, get all the websites again, say in 2025, I think we'll see a really big difference.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Robyn. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Robyn. Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing about that, and to hear at the end too how you got to a point in your career where it was like, right, I'm going to do a PhD. I got exactly to that. I just submitted mine earlier this month, so I can totally relate to that. So as I said before, I'm in teacher education, initial teacher education, and geography education in particular, and I guess I was really interested to hear not only about the process, but also obviously about the results, because I guess I see the results of the campaigns, and that becomes useful for me to use with students in schools, but also, with aspiring teachers. Not that we can encourage activism, but we can always show opportunities for things that can be done to make a difference, because obviously a lot of students in geography are very concerned about climate change and ways that they can contribute and mitigate perhaps future damages. And so I guess my question is there work ahead, or is there any thought around maybe connecting with school education or geography or initial teacher education, or packaging some of your results as materials to use in schools? Like, I was just kind of coming at it in that angle, and sorry if that's a curveball.
No, I think that there's so many things that I would love to do and with the data, and I hope that groups do take it up more. At the moment, some of the stuff is going on the Common Social Change Library, which is a free open source library to put this type of stuff up. But I don't think they have any material specifically designed for secondary or primary school. The problem that I have is that, as you all know, it takes so much time to write an academic paper. And I have found, as I've alluded to in the presentation, that it's difficult to know where this data sits. So I've published in psychology, I've published in communication, publishing in policy, and each time it's really painful. And it just takes so much time to get that done that there's no time left for the outputs that I really care about. Now, I was a high school teacher, and I remember spending so many hours developing, it was mathematics, right? So I remember one particular lesson plan I had where they had to count the food miles, come up with a restaurant menu and count the food miles. I loved that lesson plan. Kids didn't want to do it, right? They just don't want to do a worksheet. But the sheer quantity of time to do that, I'm sure it's hard. The other challenge is that I am just early career. I'm just my first postdoc. Nobody's going to really support a project like this at the level needed to generate those outputs without a whole lot more substantial backing behind it. And that's going to take quite some time to develop.
No, thank you. I appreciate all of that, but it was a question that I felt compelled to ask. So thank you, Robyn. Thanks very much.
Well, the materials should be perfect for schools. And I'm like you, I think you shouldn't go and tell students to go and take action, right? But look at the school strike. There's so many students who do want to, and they can, even just reading stories about these activists is so inspiring for them. Perhaps it's another component of the citizen science project. We've got the data collection, but people could also use the material to create stuff in their specialty, in their profession. That could be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry, I was still on mute. You'd think I would have learned by now, but no. We've got time for one more question. So I can see Helen, you've got your hand up. Jump in, Helen. Oh, you're on mute as well, Helen, just like me.
Okay, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Robyn, for a wonderful presentation, and congratulations on your work. It's fabulous. Just looking at all of those numbers, I just wondered if you put a price on all of that work. For example, if you looked at how much the Australian Conservation Foundation raised and how much all those other organisations raised, whether that might resonate with some people, the fact that Australians are putting so much money into these voluntary not-for-profit organisations for the environment. Is anything being done about that?
Not that I'm aware of, but with Brisbane City Council, I have a bush tier group here, and what they do is each year they get you to fill out a survey with how many hours of volunteering you've done, and they use that to justify the cost of the program to the councillors. Now, there's definitely capacity for that here, because all of the income from environmental groups that have some sort of formal structure, that are charities, is registered in the ACNC. So it's easy to count it, right? And it tells you how many staff they have. And I know from my data that there would be less than 1% of environmental groups in Australia that have any money. All of them, the rest of them are volunteer. So putting that together, you'd end up with a substantial amount of human capital, and I guess financial capital as well, actually going into environmental work in Australia. At the moment, I think Landcare does some of it. The organisations which have a tier of staff, perhaps, they can afford to do these calculations, but for the rest of the groups, they can't. I think it would be really beneficial, but the other problem I've had is that some funders don't want to fund environmental activism, right? Why would you fund something that really irritates you? And so it's about framing it in the right way too. Sometimes I refer to advocacy, and I don't mention the groups that might engage in civil resistance, but that you've got to be really clear and transparent when you're applying for funding. So I'm still working through those challenges.
It's also tax deductible money, which annoys the government no end.
That's right.
Peter Costello used to go red in the face, and he tried to stop all of that.
Yeah.
And that goes on.
So on that positive note of people getting involved, but also that note of challenge of supporting some of our own projects, we'll finish up there. Thank you, Helen. And Helen asking the last question is also a nice segue. I wanted to, like Robyn, give a shout out to our CHASS Awards this year that have just opened up. So we have our Distinctive Works Award again that Robyn won. We also have a Future Leaders Writing Prize, and that's in partnership with the Future Leaders group that Dr. Helen Sykes heads up. So Helen's helping us support that one. And we also have a new award that is looking at creative responses to COVID this year. So do check them out and send them around if you know any good people who might be potential recipients of those awards. So a shout out for our CHASS Awards, and a final shout out just before we finish for Social Sciences Week. So this event has been part of Social Sciences Week that CHASS is a partner on. And this is an opportunity to share some of the wonderful work that goes on in the social sciences with a wider audience, which we clearly need to do and do more and better. But we're doing all right because there's 73 events this week. So if you go to www.socialsciences.org/Social Sciences Week, you can find the whole program and hopefully get along to something else as well. But thank you, Robyn, for being part of CHASS's events and for your wonderful work. It was an honour to be able to recognise it and for presenting to us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Whether you're stuck at home or allowed to get out, do enjoy the rest of Social Sciences Week. All right, goodbye all.
Thank you.